turn to the book of Ruth, chapter 2. Ruth 2. The last time we were talking about Ruth, we were amazed at the grace and the kindness of this man Boaz in the life of Ruth and Naomi. Not only did Ruth find a place to work, but the glimmer of hope at the end of chapter 1 that the barley harvest was on the way had gone beyond their wildest dreams. These widows wouldn't have to concern themselves with food for a long time to come. If you remember in verse 17 of chapter 2, so she gleaned, Ruth, in the field until evening, then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And we talked about an ephah was about 29 pounds of barley, and the average male worker, what he rationed per day would be about 1 to 2 pounds. So this was Ruth collecting in one day the equivalent, of at least a half a month's wages. But there are still a lot of things in the balance. What about an heir for Naomi? How would their family line escape extinction? Could Boaz help answer any of those questions? Those were the things we ended with last week. So let's see what the Spirit's going to show us in this incredible story. Let's begin in verse 18. Ruth, and she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and can you imagine this? She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. So Boaz didn't just give Ruth a little bit of food for a general meal, like leftovers that had been gathered up. Boaz gave her so much food that she was able to bring home what hadn't been eaten to Naomi. And who knows how long it had been since Naomi had eaten. We just again see Ruth's loyal, affectionate care for her mother-in-law, Naomi. Can you imagine what Naomi's thinking right now? She doesn't have the benefit that we do of knowing what happened in those fields and how she got so much stuff. And so because of that, verse 19 at the beginning, we just see like this run-on of questions, and you can see Naomi's excitement right away. She said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked?" I mean, she's just giving her one question after another and not even giving her time to answer. And even at the end of verse 19, she doesn't wait for an answer before she said, "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So Naomi finally got her breath, and Ruth interjected at the very end of verse 19. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz." Now, in the Hebrew language, they could have introduced Boaz's name anytime in there, but the writer leaves it like, "The man's name with whom I worked." Like, come on, get it out, Boaz. So at the very end to kind of build up the anticipation there. So Naomi right away recognizes that name at the beginning of verse 20, and she said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord." So the name of Boaz triggers two responses from Naomi. So she again addresses Ruth with words of grateful praise to God for his kindness, but look at the middle here of verse 20. "Whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." She pronounces this second blessing on Boaz, but it's an interesting way she does it, because she acknowledges that it's the Lord who had not stopped showing his kindness, remember our great Hebrew word, chesed, to the living and the dead. Interesting way to put that. Why do you think she says it that way? That God is showing his kindness to the living and the dead. You don't hear many people, I wouldn't say, man, God's been blessing me. He's been blessing my parents in heaven too. You're like, well, yeah, they're in heaven. But why would she say it that way, do you think? Yeah, the sons and her husband. Yeah, it's blessing the family line. That's what she's pronouncing here. That again, that strong sense of family that they have. And then his name also triggers another response from Naomi at the end of verse 20. She also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." Our first week we mentioned a Hebrew word called goel, and that is the word kinsman or redeemer here. And that was a word taken from Israelite law. And it doesn't describe a precise kinship relationship. We don't know that yet. But it does describe the near relatives to whom both law and custom gave certain duties toward the family. So, what was the kinsman redeemer, the Goel, what was he or she responsible for? Well, we're not going to read all these verses, but if you want to write a few things down, because it would take us a little long, but I'm going to give you a number of things that we can find as we put some Old Testament passages together that give us some of the responsibilities of the kinsman redeemer. Number one, Leviticus 25, verses 25 through 31 tells us that the kinsman redeemer was responsible for the repurchase of property once owned by family members but sold because of economic necessity. So that kinsman redeemer could come in and repurchase that property, that land. Remember, land to these people is extra important. It's their most, outside of people, it's their most important commodity they have. So then the second thing we learn about kinsman redeemer in Leviticus 25, verses 47 through 55, is that if financially able, the kinsman redeemer was to redeem relatives whose poverty had forced them to sell themselves into slavery. That's one step beyond losing the property. It's things are so bad, I had to sell myself into slavery. So the kinsman redeemer, if he's able to financially, can help get them out of slavery. 3, in Numbers 35:12, and also verses 19 through 27 of Numbers 35, the kinsman redeemer had the duty to avenge the killing of a relative. Now that's a very long passage that would be interesting to get into. That's a whole other lesson sometime. But to put it quickly, they had these cities of refuge for people that had been found guilty, and they had to go to the city of refuge, the person that had committed the crime, the murder, and they couldn't leave it until the death of the high priest, whoever was named the high priest when they committed the murder. So basically, these verses tell us that if that person who's supposed to be in that city of refuge happens to wander out of it, and their kinsman finds them, they can exact their own level of justice, if you know what I mean. So it was incentive, stay in the city of refuge. 4, in Numbers 5, we're told that the kinsman redeemer was the recipient of money paid as a restitution for a wrong committed against someone who is now dead. So if, I'll just read this verse. But if the man has no next of kin to whom restitution may be made for the wrong, the restitution for a wrong shall go to the Lord for the priest, in addition to the ram of atonement with which atonement is made for him. It can go to that kinsman redeemer. He can have that money that would be paid in restitution, but there's no one else but him that could, kind of like an inheritance of sort. And the fifth thing we learn in the Old Testament, both in Job 19 and in Psalm 119, verse 154, is the kinsman redeemer was called upon to assist in a lawsuit to see that justice was done. And so these are just a number of things they would have known like we know the laws. They knew these laws. And those 5 facts tell us that there's a lot that they could be helped by with this kinsman redeemer. And Naomi says at the end of verse 20, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. What does that let you know? There's more than one. So this gets very interesting. Naomi, first of all, clears away any doubt that Ruth has a social status where there are certain benefits of a kinsman redeemer. It introduced, Naomi did, the hopefulness of Boaz in the story so far. And we're told he's not just a prominent, good-natured Israelite, but Boaz is a near relative with obligations toward these women. They're not gold diggers. In the ancient Near East, if you're a woman and you have no way to support yourself, and there weren't many ways to support yourself, you were destitute. So they needed help. And we also are learning from what Naomi's saying that there's a contrast as we look at the bitterness in chapter 1 when she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," bitter, for the Lord has basically dealt harshly with me. We see that bitterness in chapter 1, and now we see her joy in chapter 2. And it seems like there's a reversal of circumstances. Things are looking up. Now, if we were hearing the story again for the first time, and that's what we kind of have to make ourselves do, don't read ahead. My wife has this thing she'll do if I'm watching one of my shows I told you about a number of weeks ago. Not soap operas. My mom used to say watching their stories was what women used to do. But one of my Datelines are one of those, and my son's the same way. They will, as the show's going on, they'll just start Googling who this is and what happened. I'm like, I don't want to know. Shoot. Well, do you want to know? I don't want to know anything. I want to find out as the story unfolds. So kind of make yourself do that. You've heard Ruth talk before. You kind of know this has a good ending. But people who were first hearing this, they don't know that it's going to be good. They know Boaz is a relative of Naomi's on her husband's side, Elimelech. But he's not the only one, and Naomi knows this. So that word redeemers tells us there are other people who could perform this function in these women's lives. So how in the world is Boaz going to play out in all this? Verse 21, I love this. This is the writer here. And Ruth the Moabite said, there's that word Moabite again. The author does not want us to forget she's a Moabite. What are some reasons do you think that the author is putting in her ethnic background again? Well, one thing we talked about is the way foreigners were so treated by Israel. It wasn't so great. And the Israelites weren't big fans of the Moabs. Their teams didn't play well together. And I think the author's also wanting to remind us that because Ruth is a foreigner, she is really receiving extra amount of chesed, of kindness from this man named Boaz. He's not taking care of one of his people. This is a man that's just stepping way above what anyone would have expected hearing the story. Verse 21, and Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. The best way, I think, to translate Ruth's words here, not that I'm smarter than the people that translated the English Standard Version, better to me than besides would be why he even said to me. The NIV translates it, what is more? So in other words, well, like Naomi, this gets even better. Kind of, why he even said this, get a load of this is great. And Ruth is just letting Naomi begin to understand her relationship to Boaz. She knows that she was given extraordinary gleaning rights. And isn't that what we all want in life? More gleaning rights? I'm just kidding. She feels like she's now part of Boaz's plan. He's looking out for her. Now, what's going to happen next? Well, God's in control, providence, but how's he working through people? Verse 22, and Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. Remember how it worked in the harvest? It was a person with a sickle, and then behind that person that was harvesting would be the people, the women that would catch it, and they would put it together in bundles and tie it up. And then behind them would be the gleaners picking up what was left over after that process. So just like Boaz told her, hey, stay with my women. Don't stray from them. Don't stray into another field. Stick with my women, my workers. And so, like a good Jewish mother, she's reminding her that what he said was true. Just, how many times have I heard my kids say, okay, you've already told me, I get it. But, as a parent, you can never say it enough. So verse 23, so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. So, Ruth follows her mother-in-law's counsel, sticks close to these servant girls in the field. Now, here's an interesting thing. Till both the barley and wheat harvest were over. Now, we're reading this like this. This is going quick to us. But those two harvest seasons would have lasted for about 7 weeks. And so that's kind of, as we keep reading, going to be like, that's a longer time than I figured here. Day one, Boaz is just giving Ruth all these great extras. And I must admit that growing up, I would think of the next thing that happens like day 3. But 7 weeks. Because the next phrase says, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Why is that such a big deal? Well, every night after she would glean, for 7 weeks probably, she'd go back with her mother-in-law. She didn't go out for a milkshake date with Boaz. There's nothing going on there. So nice to have the food. We're eating, we're not starving, but there's a lot of oy vey. What's going on here? What is going to happen to us? Because we have bigger concerns here. There seems to be no development, no progression in the relationship of Ruth and Boaz. I mean, it looked like there was going to be this clear solution to their widowed situation, and it seems like it's dying out. And they have food again, that's fine, but it's not solving their long-term problems. So it could look like what promised to be a helpful relationship has now kind of faded. We've all had that in our life. We met somebody that we thought, boy, this person I think is really going to be good for me, whatever, if it was in the workplace, or maybe you were without a job and you were trying to find a job, and you met someone and thought, hey, in a networking way, this person can really help me. And you say, if you have any openings at your place of business, could you keep me in mind? Sure. They get your information. And in this context, it's over 2 months, you hear nothing. Like, that really bums me out. I thought something would come of that. So if the end of chapter 1, if it ended happily, chapter 2 kind of ends quietly, almost with a dull thud, a sad letdown. The story seems to be at an impasse. Only someone who's got real assertive boldness can get the story moving again from an earthly standpoint. And it makes me think of the times that you and I have to wait on God. It seems like things are starting to move the right direction. We're excited because we had a real tough season that we hope we're getting through and getting past. And it seems like there's something good on the horizon, and then we're in a waiting mode again. And it's not so easy for us. But take that thought, and let's just kind of summarize this second act. We know that Ruth has found favor on one level with Boaz and on another with Yahweh, with God. She is committed to Israel. She's committed to her mother-in-law. She's committed, as she said, your God will be my God. Ruth has a key role in whatever solution there will be to Naomi's childlessness to carry on that family line. And God is apparently making partial payment of Ruth's wages through this generosity of Boaz. But again, I think one of the things that hits me as I read this is God graciously honors those who practice simple devotion to Him. God has promised, I'm going to take care of your needs. And sometimes we get a little bit confused between what our needs are and what our wants are. God has a good way of clearing that up for us. God, I really need this. And you don't get it, and God's like, you didn't really need that. And I'm not trying to be a spoil sport, but I'm giving you what you need. I'm giving you grace sufficient for right now. And we get a little bit antsy. Sometimes God, I think, a lot of times, he's out to stretch our faith by inviting us to take what seems like even a risk in obeying him. I've heard people say that, God will never give you anything too tough for you to handle. I can't tell you how big of a heresy that is. It seems like all God gives you is too much you can handle by yourself. You have to have him. There's no way I can make it without God. So as I look at this story, I can think of the times even in my life where I think that God is calling on these women to take a leap of faith and trust him and obey him. And I think it's really easy for us to read a story like Ruth's and think, yeah, it took some risk for Ruth to leave her homeland and being willing to take care of her mother-in-law. But if you were to hear what I was going through, Mike, nothing against Ruth, but you don't understand. I am going through something overwhelming. And I can't possibly do what it seems like God's calling me to do. I just can't. Now, Ruth is, as far as we know, every day, every step, she's living out this dynamic faith in God. This is all new for her. Moabites didn't worship Yahweh, the real God. And the question is, how are we doing, those of us who've been walking with God for a lot longer than Ruth did, how are we doing with things that are going on in our life now? Especially challenges. I think it's real easy to feel overwhelmed when we look at life, and especially when we're going through a valley, as these women are, and it's real easy to get stuck in one of two gears. Now, stuck in gears is an important thing because I learned how to drive shifting gears. Anybody else learn how to drive that way? I still to this day only use my right foot. I haven't driven anything that's needed a clutch in a while, but boy, I'm ready if it happens, I love driving a car with stick. And my dad, one Wednesday night after church, we had to drive on the interstate home, right by where CBN, Regent University, it's right around there. We'd get off going through this little place where our church was, and we were right kind of across the highway from where Regent is now. And he says, "You want to drive?" I had my learners. I'm like, yeah, I do. But I knew what this meant. There's no way he can pass over the car to me and I can just stay in fourth gear in our nice Volkswagen Rabbit. He was saying, let's see how you can get going here. So we switched places. My dad wasn't always the most patient man, but he was really patient this evening when this happened. And I put it in first. He tells me, okay, get it in first, and you basically want to let that clutch out as you give it gas, okay? So I begin to do that, and we were doing what I later learned was called jump bucking. At least they call it that in Virginia. Boom. And he says, okay, that means, you let out your clutch a little too fast. He's being patient, and I get going again, boom, I keep jump bucking. Finally, behind me, I see some friendly lights from a policeman. And my dad the policeman comes up to the window and he said, "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay?" He's thinking maybe I'm a little too intoxicated to be driving. "No, I'm this bad sober, sir." So my dad just said to him, "Yeah, I'm teaching my son how to drive a stick," and you can tell he's jump bucking. "Yeah, I saw he was. Okay, all right, good luck, see ya." And somehow I got it going that night. And Dad also taught me other lessons. You don't stay in first unless you're going really, really slow or going up a hill. You're going to hear the engine tell you when to go to second, when to go to third, and we only had 4 gears there, when to go to fourth. And I miss just being able to be at a stoplight and pop that clutch and just let it go. But anyway, that's a different talk. But I think we can get stuck in one of two gears. The first gear I'm going to call it's this: what happened? And that is the gear where we're focused and stuck on yesterday. And we say, what happened? We get stuck in guilt and regret. Now, there's a problem with 2020 hindsight. It involves no faith. But if you're a person that gets stuck in regret about things that you did wrong or things that went wrong, you can go through it over and over and say, yeah, you know what? Why didn't I see that I should have done this? How come I didn't see that? And boy, I can see that now, and I wish I could just go back. Time machine, go back in time. Ruth could have been real stuck in the what happened mode, because she could have been stuck in her what? What's going on? What's the biggest thing that's happened in Ruth's life not long ago? Grief. Now, in no way do I want to suggest we don't take her grief seriously. Come on, get over it. There's no getting over it when you lose someone. You work through it, and grief is different for everyone, but the best analogy is grief is like a sea, and you don't know when the next wave is going to hit you. Sometimes you're kind of ready for the wave. Maybe it's the anniversary of their passing or their birthday or Christmas, but there's other times you are not ready for that wave. And growing up, as I did body surfing, I wasn't a surfboard guy, there's nothing like coming up after you've ridden a wave and just having another wave smack you right back down. You have no idea where you are. And that's what it feels like sometimes with grief. You didn't see that one coming. That's what could be going on with this young girl. She could just be saying, what in the world happened? Ruth could have just let her grief weigh her down to the point that she was stuck asking God, what in the world happened? Why did you allow this to happen? I'm not trying to be in any way, God, speak against you. I want to revere you, but why would you let this happen? If all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, is this a good I won't see till heaven? Because I don't get it now. She could be stuck in what happened. And that's when we get paralyzed by guilt and regret. But there's nothing that we can do with what happened. If I had a big one of those hourglasses and you could see the sand pouring through it, well, the what happened would be down here. It's already there. And you're focused on the bottom of that hourglass. I can't believe it. Look at that. I cannot believe this. And you just loop it in your brain. Some people get stuck in what happened. They get stuck in yesterday. Other people get stuck in what I call what's next. And that's not a focus on yesterday. That's a focus on tomorrow. What's next? And these are people that get stuck in their worry and their doubt. They're paralyzed by their anxiety, by their worry, because they want to know what's next. What's next, God? What are we going to do next? Please let me see 4 or 5 steps ahead. I'll trust you, but let me see. One of my nieces, who's now a mother, when she was a little girl, I think she stopped asking this question now, but when she was a little girl, and she was always about this thin, so she's one of those people I just love to watch. They can eat anything, and it never leaves a pound. I don't understand that she's related to me. But when she would finish breakfast, let's say, the first thing little Michelle would say is, "What's for lunch?" You're like, are you kidding me? After lunch, what's for dinner? And we always say, Michelle, you just finished eating, okay? Don't worry about that. She wasn't worried that we weren't going to find food. She knew there was plenty of food. She just wanted to know what's next. What's next? And I think sometimes we can get like that. Some people that are, what happened, you're not a worrier, you're stuck in regret. But then someone who's a, what's next, you don't get stuck in the past, you're worried too much about the future. Ruth could have been stuck in worry and doubt and anxiety. And again, I'm not dismissing the seeming predicament. There's a predicament that they're in. But Ruth could have let her worry about the future weigh her down to the point that she was stuck asking God questions like, what are you going to do to take care of us? We've stepped out on faith here. We need someone to take care of us. Who's it going to be? Who's this kinsman redeemer going to be? This guy's nice to me, and now we're 7 weeks in, and that's it? Is there anything else? When we get stuck in what's next, we become paralyzed by anxiety and worry. But there's nothing we can do about tomorrow. Hourglass, where's tomorrow? Up here. I can't do anything about it right now. It's only the middle that I can do something about. That spot where it hits it, the now. And instead of getting stuck in what happened or what's next, we need to ask a focused, faith-filled question, and it's this. Number 3, what now, Lord? That's different from what happened, and it's different from what next. This is a focus on now, because that's all you have. And the focus on now involves one word: obedience. We obey God by doing now what we know to be right. And while we're obeying God, doing what God wants us to do, we bathe our life in prayer. We know first and foremost, if we're going to do anything, really the truest hard work is the work of prayer, the wrestling with God. It's an ongoing act of faith in God if I continually pray. Pray without ceasing sounds like a lot until you're going through a lot in your life and you have nowhere else to turn, and so you just are talking to God, asking Him, give me strength, help me not to get stuck in the past, help me not to worry about the future. Now, prayer is not a substitute for action. It doesn't mean that we do nothing but sit down and pray that God finally hits us over the head with this heavenly baseball bat, and we're like, okay, no, that's not what God's going to do. We keep doing what we know He wants us to do now. But how do we know what He wants us to do now? Well, let me unpack this a bit, but we listen for the sound of His voice. Oh no, I thought we vetted Mike better than this. He's one of those, he hears God speaking to him. It's not going to be what you think. I've never heard him talk to me, and I don't know if he's a baritone or a tenor or a bass. But there's a way we can hear God's voice. We have to be able to be tuned in and be able to hear. A few years ago, my dad passed in 2018, and it probably happened, I'd say, somewhere in 2017. I'll tell you what happened. I won't tell you how I first was brought into it. So my father is living with this friend in Oklahoma, and my dad gets a call one day from Justin. This man first calls. Justin's my son. This man calls and says, "Can I speak to Mr. Thomas?" He said, "Sure, it's me." He said, "Okay, so here's the deal. Your son just got arrested, your grandson, and he has asked us to call you for bail money. But he's afraid to let his dad know. And so we're going to need you to wire so much money to this so that we can get him bailed out." So my dad has Parkinson's, so he's beginning to struggle with dementia. Plus, his hearing has been going a long time. So there was probably lots of what? And my dad's level, I know later when I hear about this, his anxiety shoots up. He loves his grandson. He loves Justin. And so he has enough wisdom to say, "Let me talk to Justin." So Justin gets on the phone, and Justin is real, his voice is way up here. And he says, "Grandpa, I'm so sorry, but I don't want Dad to know. I'm so sorry. I just need you to please bail me out of this, and I'll explain later. I'm so sorry." And Dad, is talking to Justin, and my dad's trying to, he says later, it didn't sound like him, but it did sound like him because he was so anxious and worried. So how I get brought into this is I get a text from my sister. "Hey," and this is a weird question. I'm living at this time in South Carolina by then. And I get a text, Michael, where's Justin? It's like, well, he should be at work. He worked at Apple in Maryland. Can you find out? My sister is very wise in not giving me everything happening. So I text Justin, hey, are you working? A few minutes later, yep. And so I get back and say, yeah, he's at work. You're sure? I said, yeah, he's at work. So my dad, I was told later, was this close to dropping the money they were asking for. But later on, my sister heard about, and the friend he was living with heard about these scams where they were doing this to elderly people. I don't know how much lower you can go in society. When they're taking advantage of them out of love for their grandchild, and they would never see that money again, obviously. So the friend with Dad kept explaining, I just think something's fishy about this, Tommy. I really think something's fishy. Don't do this yet. So my sister gets back and says, Justin is at work. He's not in jail. Because my sister says, could he be in jail? Well, theoretically, but he's a good kid. So we covered it, So my dad feels dumb now. But we're trying to encourage him. This was tailor-made to people like you that are older, that know that they know you love your grandchild. And what they didn't know about my dad is that they didn't know that his hearing was a problem. So he really wasn't ready for this. He was easy prey for them. So when we talk and hear people say, you need to know what God's voice sounds like, what do we mean by that? Well, let me tell you, we know what God wants us to do by knowing the sound of his voice, and the best place to learn the sound of his voice is to saturate ourselves in his word, to spend our lives letting it go into our heart and mind, so that when there's something coming and we go, is this God saying this? We can say, God doesn't talk like that. If it's this constant, what, you did this and it was really bad, and I know that you said you were sorry, but you really, really blew it. And I know you confessed it to me as a sin, yes, and I've forgiven you. God he doesn't bring stuff back up. He doesn't rehash with us when he's forgiven us. He tosses it as far as the east is from the west. He promises not to use it against us. And if we ever hear a voice that sounds anxious, we know that's not God either. Remember, Jesus on earth never once was ever in a hurry. People were always trying to hurry him. He took his time because he was doing his Father's business. We keep obeying what we know God wants us to do. And that, I can tell you, doesn't have a lot of fireworks with it. It doesn't look amazingly impressive to everyone. In fact, it can look pretty mundane. But Ruth wasn't stuck in the past. Ruth wasn't worried, it seems, about the future. What did Ruth do? When we first saw her, what does she do? I'm going to get up and I'm going to go gleaning. She's doing all she can. And she's working. And every day she gets up and she gleans and she gleans. Now, obeying God will sometimes mean we have to wait. And most of us don't like that. Be still and know I'm God. Calm down. But other times, obeying God means that we don't have to wait. It means God wants us to move. But what he's asking us to do is not very comfortable. And I want to tell you what that looked like a number of years ago in my life. Very painful story that I won't go into the details. I was in jail, just kidding. So I had pastored at a church for 10 years, and I always use too many air quotes, but to honor me, the church sent me on a 4-month sabbatical. And that was great. And so we kind of did it as a combination staycation, some at home in Maryland, and then we went to go see her, Lisa's parents, and went to Virginia to see my parents. It was just a great time. But even on that sabbatical, we began to really feel resistance from the enemy, an attack happening even in our family. What we didn't know was there was a real rough attack waiting for us when we got home. And I won't go into details, but I had a tendency in my life in ministry to have ants in my pants. It was always, okay, you're going to be in this church, okay, what's next? I was a what's next guy with that. And Lisa would say, you need to calm down and just enjoy where you are and what you're doing. Enjoy where you are. So Lisa was always the one saying, calm down, God's going to take care of this. And God put me in some great places to serve. And we were in this church, and I thought had passed some of the big tests. And that was, I no longer had ants in my pants. It wasn't what I thought it would be, or I should say hoped what it would be, but I was beginning to be okay with the way it was, and that's not a bad thing. And I was thinking, I really want to show these people how committed I am to them. I get up my first Sunday after sabbatical, and I talk about kind of cast some vision for the next 10 years. But I didn't know what was waiting for me. I won't, again, go into the details other than say that it was a mess. Now, if I were to list off the stuff in the mess, you'd go, really? This is what was going on? But when you put it all together, you're like, that's pretty awful. So I was sitting together with, our church had elders and deacons. So probably the analogy would be the elders serve and how the deacons do here. And I was sitting after getting shell-shocked by some initial things that had gone on while I was away. And I began to think, I don't know that this sabbatical was about me getting rest at all. So I'm sitting at this one of my elders' house, and we're sitting in a circle, and I'm beginning to address my concerns. And I'm trying to do so biblically. And there was such intensity in the air. And we went around and around, and I was trying, as a teacher, a lot of times what I can do that isn't good is I can think if something's not happening or someone's not understanding what I'm saying, I'll try to say it this way and then that way. Wears my kids out because I got it. But sometimes someone that's not understanding something, I think, well, I'll try this or I'll try that, I'll try this. And that night, there was no doubt in my mind, and I can say maybe only a couple of times in my life I have felt this, no audible voice, but God spoke to my heart, and basically his message was, it's time to go. And he wasn't saying it was time to end the meeting. I was like, ugh. Well, I thought you just really wanted me to settle down. It's time to go. Now, they weren't asking me to go, but it's time to go. I heard that, but I didn't hear it. I thought, looking back, and here's my struggle of, as you know, mine would be more toward the regret. God didn't tell me when to go. That'd have been nice. God didn't tell me how to go. Okay, I want you to leave here, and we're going to do this and do that, and God doesn't do that. So I kind of took that disobediently and put it over here and bullheadedly charted the course of to get this thing right. I just need to talk with him about this and work through this so that we can be on the same page. And that happened in late September of 2011. And for October, November, December. Now, by the way, when this is all happening, we're continuing to go through talks. My family is being attacked over here. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do because it's a full court press by Satan. And he's just reaming on us over here. and this is happening, and my mom's dying over here. I'm just getting worked over. And so I believe, looking back, what God wanted me to do was just start making plans to leave. He'll take care of the rest, but whatever I would know to do, to start making plans. Be smart, begin to look around. And my wife, actually, who always said, you have ants in your pants, a few years before, she'd never, ever said this to me. Hey, Michael, if you'd ever like to look around for another church, that'd be okay with me. Now, right there, a guy told me early in ministry, listen to your wife. And, oh, no, I've grown past the ants in the pants. So because I didn't put things into motion, and 6 months later, when I really realized what I needed to do, I made plans. On paper, they looked really good. But part of those plans on our life going fairly smooth were dependent on the very people who were living in sin. I was depending on them to honor promises that they made. And so I stepped out. Okay, we're good. Took them maybe a few weeks to totally go back on their word, and I'm just like this. So I'm not saying that God wanted me that night to do all this stuff and be ready to go, and he just wanted me to take the next step. What's next, God? What's going on now? What do I do now, Lord? And I believe I could have followed him and obeyed him. I don't in any way want to encourage us not to make any plans. Some people say, man makes plans and God laughs. I don't think he does. God has made us to be creatures where he likes us to set goals and plans, but we make our plans with an open hand because God always will say, I like where you're going, but let's change this over here and let's do that. So instead of getting stuck in what happened or what's next, God was leading Ruth to be focused on that faith-filled question of what now, Lord? The focus is on now. It is obedience. What do I do now? And that can be as simple as love your wife. It can be as simple as continue to be faithful in the word. It's as simple as keep praying. But you're like, God, yeah, but what else? Just do what you know to do today. I'm going to guide you through this. All Ruth knew as she's waiting here, she's got to keep gleaning. That's all I know. We read the rest and go, oh, come on. No, but she didn't know that. She kept gleaning. She kept trusting her God and kept believing that he would guide her. And I believe Naomi did too. I'll close with this. As I was thinking about this today there's an old gospel song that was written around 1950 that we grew up singing in church. And I think his name was Ira Stanfill. He was a pastor, musician, evangelist. And it's called I Know Who Holds Tomorrow. Many of you have sung it. I don't know about tomorrow. I just live from day to day. I don't borrow from its sunshine, for its skies may turn to gray. I don't worry over the future, for I know what Jesus said. And today I'll walk beside him, for he knows what is ahead. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. We need to cling to that as these women are. We need to cling to it, whatever's going on in our life right now. Hold on to that unseen hand and be thankful he's never going to let ours go. Let's pray.